Welcome to Season 2 of the Changing Earth podcast with Sara F. Hathaway, blending survival fiction and fact to bring you entertaining education that will help you dream, survive, and thrive. And now, here's your host, Sara F. Hathaway.
Hi, and welcome back to the Changing Earth podcast. I'm your host, Sara F. Hathaway, and this is Season 2, Episode 5 of the Changing Earth podcast. So last week, Erica met with Matthew, and they argued about this new system that they have in place. This week, Erica is reflecting on the decisions that had to be made while Vince is in taking his turn talking with the principal, or Matthew in this case. After we hear the Without Land story, L. Douglas Hogan is back with us. Now he's the author of Oath Takers and the Tyrant series. He does some great work that I highly suggest you check out. He is going to join us today to discuss the threat of overpopulation and possible solutions that we as an evolving, educated human species could take to start to heal the problem. So anyway, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the Without Land story. Without Land by Sara F. Hathaway, Chapter 5. Deep down, she kind of understood why this had been the government's solution to such a huge problem. The world was a very different place now. Erica glanced over at the map that hung on Matthew's wall. All that remained of California were islands that used to be the old coastal mountain range. The states of Oregon and Washington had been cut in half by the rise of the new Pacific Ocean coastline. The water had inundated the New England states and had cut the states on the Atlantic coast in half as well. The water had surged up the Mississippi River, devouring Louisiana and expanding its width into all the neighboring states, straight up to Lake Michigan. The land on the new East Coast was one big island now, made up of the Appalachian Mountains and its foothills. It was wedged in between the Atlantic Ocean to the east, the Mississippi to the west, and the Great Lakes to the north. The Great Lakes themselves had swelled out of control and turned the state of Michigan into a little bitty point sticking out of the water. Erica stared at the point and thought of all the friends and families she had that lived there before. She prayed daily for their safety. Hopefully they were in some refugee camp raising hell as well. Matthew watched her staring at the map and followed carefully where her eyes went. He had to find out what made this woman tick if he was ever going to get her to behave. "You can go and send your husband in." He shot his words at her like a dart and then watched her gaze snap back to him. Matthew was done with her as well. They had this argument far too often, and neither side was going to budge. He would need time to stir over what kind of example he wanted to make out of her. Erica walked down the hall looking at the pictures that hung there. The Statue of Liberty adorned one frame that was hung next to a picture of old New York. The other side of the wall was lined with photos of all the monuments that were lost in Washington, D.C. They were haunting images of yesterday's world. She finally reached the door. As she walked through, she looked at Vince with her eyes full of love. "It's your turn in the principal's office," she jested. "I can hardly wait," he teased back. "You didn't fire him up too much, did you?" "Who, me?" "Oh, no, I was a good girl," she replied with a sly look in her eyes. "Well, here goes nothing," he said, giving her a kiss as he left through the door. Erica had plenty of time to think while she sat waiting for Vince. She thought back to the times before all this mess began. Life had been so simple in their tiny house nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Dexter was so young and full of wonder before a life of survival and containment had dampened his spirits. She remembered his blonde hair bouncing in the California sun. Now it had turned to brown like his mother and father's. They had worked hard then to earn a little money just to enjoy the extra things in life, like going to concerts or amusement parks. Now they just worked hard to keep the landlord overseers off their backs. She remembered how fast time had passed when you had some kind of electronic device buzzing in your hand, whether you were playing a game, surfing the net, or catching up with your friends on Facebook. She wondered if these things still existed somewhere outside of the refugee camp. It was clear they weren't going to receive access to anything like that in this dust hole anytime soon. It was true that they had plenty of landowners interested in adopting them, but Vince and Erica had never felt comfortable with going to work for any of them. The whole situation seemed so wrong that they decided to just stay here in this piecemeal society. At least they were all together. Many of their friends that they had escaped California with had chosen to stay in Las Vegas and avoid adoption as well. Of course, the authorities had not looked favorably upon this tight-knit group that was bent on staying together and rejecting the new system. But Erica and her group from California had been some of the first refugees placed here. They were here before the adoption policy had been started, and were not as easily convinced to surrender to the situation as the new refugees that were shipped in regularly. Erica watched the brass doorknob start to turn in the room filled with the sound of Vince and Matthew's laughter and loud chatting. Erica's face froze in a look of surprise. Vince said his goodbyes to Matthew, and then Matthew disappeared back through the door without a word to Erica. Vince smoothly strolled across the open space with a jovial bounce. He immediately saw the shocked look on her face, but remained quiet and simply bent down to give her a sweet kiss on the cheek. As he recoiled from the motion, he saw the look on her face turn to a sinister gaze of accusation. "What?" he asked sarcastically. "What was that all about?" Erica inquired. "Oh, it's really no big deal, Erica. Matthew understood our decision, and he really values having me as a manager at the farms. So," his teasing was cut short. So a button on a shirt, you little brown noser." Erica gave him a shot in the arm with her balled-up fist. "He told me you were going to be punished by being put to work on the water line." "You know Matthew, Erica. He talks big, but he's realistic." Vince was still shrugging it off. "You're such a smoozer, Vince." Erica looked at him lovingly and kissed him. Vince just comes out of there smelling like a rose. He's just sweet-talking Matthew and has it all worked out, much to Erica's dismay. So now let's go ahead and welcome L. Douglas Hogan to the show. Now, Doug is the author of the Tyrant series and the book Oath Takers. L. Douglas Hogan is a USMC veteran with over 20 years in public service. Among these are 3 years as an anti-tank infantryman, 1 year as a Marine Corps marksmanship instructor, 10 years as a part-time police officer, and 17 years working in state government, doing security work and supervision. He is the best-selling author of Oath Takers, has authored 4 books in a series titled Tyrant, and is working on the 6th, a final book of the series. He has been married over 20 years, has 2 children, and is faithful to his church, where he resides in Southern Illinois. So let's go ahead and welcome Doug to the show. Hi, Doug. How you doing?
Good, Sarah. Glad to be here.
Thanks very much for coming back on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Hey, I'm glad.
So in this chapter, Erica muses about why the government took the steps it did while she's waiting for Vince. So our planet has a lot of problems currently. And because of overpopulation, these problems are even more pressing. And if we had a disaster that reduced the available land masses by even more, we would be in some very serious trouble. So let's talk about survival in an overpopulated world, pretty much what we're doing right now. So what are some of the problems that we currently face because of overpopulation?
I'd say, and this is big to me because I'm kind of I got a deep spiritual rooting, but I'd say the biggest is demoralization because when people increase, lawlessness also increases with it. It's just proven, tragedy always had a way of consolidating Americans, but so far we've not lost enough freedoms. I think that's going to threaten our way of life. Supply and demand is another big one. More mouths to feed means more yield. More yield means more work. More work means more employees, and more employees means more overhead. And more overhead means what? That the price is going to be paid by the consumer. That means everything's going to be more expensive. Recently, California had that big water supply issue. Remember that?
Yeah.
I mean, you are from Cali, so I don't know if it hit your area or not, but they had to stop water in their own lawns. So, they had to stop water in their own lawns. Yeah, I mean, how bad is that when you got so many people that there's not enough water?
Right. Yeah, and the drought really, it just takes that one environmental stress to really break the camel's back because, we had just too many people and no water came.
And that's something you just can't control. I mean, that's an act of God whenever, the rains stop for a while.
Right. Right. And we're having a hard time here making new water. So, they keep shutting down like desalination projects and things like that to, create more water for the state. So we're just kind of trying to conserve our way out of it, I guess.
It's just crazy to me. We put somebody on the moon, but you're sitting on the Pacific Ocean, and we haven't figured out how to turn salt water into drinkable water yet.
Right. Yeah, it usually gets stopped by environmentalists and things like that, where we can't hurt the green toad, so we're not going to water our lawns anymore.
The tortoise, that thing has gotten in the way of so much.
You're absolutely right about the demoralization. I mean, you put too many rats in a cage, and they start fighting with each other.
Oh, yeah.
Those are current problems, so being able to control the population is another conversation all in itself, because you start pressing on a lot of our personal freedoms when you talk about how can we control the population. How can we do that while maintaining our personal liberties?
I'm a big personal liberties guy. I would say myself, personal freedoms are relative unless you understand the meaning behind them and how they were written for the Constitution. Your freedom ends where mine begins. We don't have rights over each other. That being said, I think taking care to prevent, unplanned conception is important.
Right.
Because we can't afford that. We can't force that upon another person who believes, for example, that he has a calling from God to keep populating the earth. I think natural selection will also run its course whenever you're overpopulated in smaller chunks of land. Disease is going to run rampant wherever population is in excess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's one question, I kind of always struggled with was how can we do anything about the problems without, asking people to give up some of their personal liberties. And like you say, if somebody feels the calling to do that, then who am I to tell them how they're supposed to live their life?
Right.
I've seen a lot of success with like educating the female population of, of certain different countries and whatnot. The more that you educate the female population, the more birth rates actually go down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always something I found really interesting to see. And
I'm interested in how much education it takes, for something like that to kick in. I mean, is that something that, is done in one generation? Because you're talking about teaching somebody, that's in school and they have to live their life for several years before they even get married,
right.
and maybe another year, maybe before they have a child. So it takes a long time to get that to kick in.
Yeah, but also on the other hand, you start getting, women more encouraged about their career instead of just being a baby factory, and it helps with the, keeping that under wraps so that you have other objections rather than just reproducing and making more humans on the planet.
Right. And just a knowledge base that our planet is really burdened down right now with people that are using their natural resources. Just that knowledge in itself, if it's taught enough, will give a person, the forethought to think about the decisions they make when they're mature adults.
Right. The personal responsibility to your planet, basically. So we got to keep spreading the word.
That's right.
So if you envision a world where we don't educate, we don't spread the word, we don't have people understand how important their choices are, and, that we have to do something about the overpopulation. Do you envision us that we could get to a point where our almighty governments that be would have to step in to apply some form of action?
That's what scares me the most is, have you ever heard of the United Nations Agenda 21?
Yes, I have.
Okay, yeah, 'cause that's a radical piece of legislation that the UN had developed within the last decade or so, and it's filled with pretty buzzwords. But the bottom line is, and this sounds like a horror story, but it's absolutely in the paperwork, 500 million people is the population cap for our planet, according to and it's supposed to be a voluntary action plan on the local government level. So how do you depopulate the world? That's the real question here. How, I mean, that's where we're left to imagine, the evils of humanity. How do you plan on getting the world from 7 billion people to 500 million people? How does that even happen?
Right. At all. I mean, that's not even 1 billion. That's saying that, the majority of everybody needs to go.
With 500 million people, I mean, think about it. You could be several hundred miles from your nearest neighbor. Every person on the face of the planet could be several hundred miles from their nearest neighbor.
Yeah.
That's radical.
That is highly radical. And from what I understand, it was big areas of no human interaction zones and things like that.
Well, something else here. You talking about no human interaction zones and stuff. The stuff that happened a couple of years ago at Nevada at the bunny ranch and stuff like that. There was signs that the government had put up saying this is a no First Amendment zone, and people were not allowed to go in there and express their First Amendment freedom of speech. Now, for example, I didn't know that the Constitution had limits, and boundaries and stuff like that.
I was going to say, is that even possible?
It's extremely scary. And then that caused me to want to start digging not so much because the Bureau of Land Management was I didn't know that they could be armed, that they could come in with weapons and stuff like that, and it seemed radical to me. So I started looking it up, and I saw almost all of Nevada is owned by the government, the federal government. If you look up the land mass that it controls, it's absolutely insane. And to think that the government is buying up lands it's not supposed to be buying up, because you look at the Constitution, it says it gives very specific lines in the Constitution what government land is bought up for. It's bought up for forts, for government buildings, and things like this important for government structure. It's not just to own land because it
feels like
got
it.
Animals on it that are going to eat. Exactly. And so if you look over almost everything from the Midwest, the United States, all the way over to the coast where you're at, it's almost all owned by the government. And that, to me, is very scary.
Yeah, it is. And Nevada's not the only state.
Oh, no. That's just what I looked up.
Mm-hmm. If we lost further land, because right now they're saying that the ocean levels are rising, whether we want to do anything about it or not, and we can see that from the East Coast rapidly losing land. We just had more instances on the West Coast where we're losing land to high tidal and high sea increase. So a lot of our population is on those coasts. How do you see us coping with that in a future world? I mean, how could we manage that type of, mass exodus, basically?
I don't think we could, Sarah. I mean, if we had continuity of government in such a situation, it would control the food.
Mm-hmm.
And therein lies more in starvation. If we lost our government, it would be just the opposite of that. On the opposite of the spectrum, we'd have anarchy. Both scenarios leaves us with tyrants. On the lower level, you'll have individual tyrants running around killing people and taking whatever they want. On the other end of the spectrum, we're going to have the government doing with the food whatever they want. We saw with Katrina. Everybody knew the storms were coming, and they stayed. We see it all the time in Florida. Another hurricane coming through. Nobody leaves.
Right. That's true.
You see a tsunami, people will stay. I mean, I don't know if they have an inflated view of what the government's supposed to do to protect them, but somehow they think that they're this conglomeration of invisible people that's just going to protect us and save us from everything, even natural or man-made. And it's crazy to me that people can rely so much on people that they're never going to meet.
Yeah, and how asleep can you be to not just take control of your own situation for yourself?
It's sad and scary. And so when people are refusing to leave, or that's going to be what's difficult to cope, because all those people that are refusing to leave they're lost already. All right. Say the people that do evacuate, in a case of a tsunami or something similar like that we're going to lose California. if you got the brain power to leave, the coast and come inwards towards the Midwest, where we got higher elevation and the sea, hasn't swallowed up our landmass, suddenly we're all living these restrained areas together where we're rubbing shoulders with each other and we're being put in these refugee camps. And people are being brought in. Are they being inoculated? Are they blood tests? I mean, we're talking about mass. We're talking about a lot of this, what we're used to having, hospitals and different things that are helping, to kind of weed out some sickness, are not going to be there either, and there's going to be so much people coming in. It's just going to be hard to control. It's going to be hard to cope, period. When you look at, they're coming over right now, to the United States, they're just walking in, and when with whatever they have in their bloodstream, they're bringing it in with them. We don't know what it is. And these people are going to be allowed to come into the refugee camps with us. What happens inside the refugee camps? If one person gets sick with something that's fatal, it can spread like a wildfire.
Absolutely. I didn't even think about that aspect of it as well. Yeah, because my book, I did like the border close down, but we all know how that works. I mean, people get through no matter what.
I mean, yeah, we don't have a wall, right? So we got this portion of the Rio Grande, where you can wade through. It's only waist high. There's streams of people coming through all the time. And right now, I'm a police officer. When we catch an illegal immigrant that has a legalized driver's license, which I don't understand,
yeah,
and we call ICE, we're told to let them go, to release them. We can't even charge them with anything.
Yeah, and then there's all kinds of examples, out here in California where it works because we need California needs the migrant labor, but I believe there's legal ways to do that as well. But, where it really doesn't work, because just in my hometown, last year we had a severe incident with shooting down there and police officers killed and stuff. And it was a guy who had been exported twice already, So it's pretty sad when those are the realities that come out of those situations.
I'm surprised he was even deported.
Yeah, he had already been deported twice, and he was back in the country. San Francisco is a no deport zone or whatever, so they come out of there, and this guy was bad news and ended up killing a couple of police officers. So it was really sad.
I saw that on the news.
Yep. Yeah, it was pretty big news. Alrighty, so bottom line here is we got to keep spreading the word about how important it is, to keep our population under control so we can stay in balance with what, the supply is from our planet before we destroy it, trying to just get everything out of it to keep feeding an unsustainable population.
I concur.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on with me, talking about overpopulation.
Hey, I'm glad to be here once again. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug, for coming and joining me. It was really awesome to have connected with you, and I can see a bright friendship developing out of our connection. So, man, that's one of the most rewarding things about doing this podcast is that I get to meet all these really awesome people from a lot of different professional backgrounds this year in particular with this season, because, I have psychiatrists, I have survivalists, I have storytellers, I have police officers, I have just people from all different walks of life. And it's been really awesome to make the connections that I get the honor to make. So you're definitely included in that, Doug, and really appreciate your time. So now let's go ahead and get into a pseudo review time. It's time for review time. Got an opinion? I'd love to hear it. Go ahead and give me your 2 cents on Day After Disaster or the Changing Earth podcast. Head on over to Amazon or iTunes to give me your 2 cents. So I say pseudo review time because I'm not actually going to read this review. I got a 1-star review over on iTunes, and I had to chuckle at it a little. It mostly just talked about how, the podcast isn't appropriate for children, and brought up some interesting points. So I didn't want to read it on the air, but I'm curious as to what you guys think of it. So head on over to iTunes, check out my reviews over there, and read this 1-star review. And hey, while you're over there, go ahead and leave me a review, and you'll get to hear your review on the air. But go check out that review and then give me a shout out on Facebook about what you think about that review. I don't know if I want to know, actually. No, I'm kidding. I'm actually curious to see what you guys have to say. So until next time, remember, dream, survive, thrive.
Thank you for joining Sara for this episode of the Changing Earth podcast. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Day After Disaster, Without Land, The Walls of Freedom, and Battle for the South at www.author.sarafhathaway.com. If you love Sara's books and this podcast, please head over to Amazon or iTunes and let everyone know by leaving a review.